The rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets of London as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time that evening. His black bearskin hat sat perfectly straight on his head, and his polished boots reflected the dim streetlights. James had been a member of the Queen's Guard for 8 years, but tonight felt different. Something in the air made him uneasy. At 28 years old, James had seen enough drunken tourists and rowdy locals to know when trouble was brewing. The weekend crowds were always worse, but this Saturday night brought an unusual energy to the streets surrounding Buckingham Palace. Groups of young men wandered past his post, their voices getting louder with each passing hour. James stood motionless at his assigned position near the palace gates. His training had taught him to remain perfectly still, no matter what happened around him. Tourists often tried to make the guards laugh, move, or react in some way. Most of the time, it was harmless fun. Children would wave, adults would take selfies, and families would pose for photos. James had learned to tune it all out. But tonight was different. 3 men in their early 20s approached his post around 10 o'clock. They reeked of alcohol and walked with the unsteady confidence that only comes from too many drinks. James noticed them immediately but kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. As protocol demanded. "Look at this one," slurred the tallest of the group. A young man with messy brown hair and expensive clothes that suggested he came from money, standing there like a statue. "Bet he thinks he's so important." The second man, shorter but stockier, laughed loudly. "These guards are just for show anyway. They don't actually do anything. Just stand around all day looking pretty in their fancy uniforms." James felt his jaw tighten, but he remained perfectly still. He had heard these comments countless times before. People often assumed the Queen's Guard were merely ceremonial figures, not understanding that each guard was a highly trained soldier from elite regiments like the Grenadier Guards. Coldstream Guards, or Welsh Guards, the third man, who had been quiet until now, stepped closer to James. "I heard they're not even allowed to move. Like those street performers, you know? Except they get paid by the taxpayers to stand around and do nothing." James could feel their presence growing closer. His peripheral vision caught movement as one of them reached toward him. The tall one was trying to touch his rifle. James shifted his grip on his SA-80 assault rifle, a subtle but clear warning that he was very much aware of what was happening. "Did you see that?" The stocky man laughed. "He moved. The statue moved." "Try to get his hat off," urged the quiet one. "I bet it would make a great souvenir." James felt a hand brush against his bearskin hat. In one smooth motion, he stepped back and brought his rifle to the ready position, pointing it directly at the group. His voice boomed across the street with military precision. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." The 3 men stumbled backward, clearly startled by the sudden movement and authoritative command. For a moment, they seemed to realize they had crossed a line, but the alcohol in their systems quickly restored their false courage. "Relax, mate," the tall one said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "We're just having a bit of fun. No need to get all worked up about it." James returned to his position but remained alert. He could see other pedestrians stopping to watch the confrontation. Some pulled out their phones to record what was happening. James knew that whatever occurred next would likely end up on social media within minutes. The 3 men huddled together, whispering and occasionally glancing back at James. He could tell they were planning something else. His military training kicked in as he assessed the situation. 3 intoxicated individuals, growing crowd of onlookers, and no immediate backup visible. He would need to handle this carefully. After a few minutes, the men approached again, this time more boldly. The stocky one pulled out his phone and started recording. "We're going to make you famous, guard boy," he called out. "Let's see how long you can stand there while we have some real fun." The tall man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. James couldn't immediately identify what it was, but his instincts told him it wasn't good. The third man positioned himself on the other side, clearly trying to flank him. "You know what I think?" the tall one continued, his words slurred but his intent clear. "I think these guards are all cowards hiding behind their fancy uniforms and ceremonial weapons. I bet this one wouldn't know how to fight if his life depended on it." James felt his training warring with his human emotions. Every fiber of his being wanted to respond to the insults, to defend not just himself but every member of the guard who had served with honor and distinction. These men had no idea that he had completed 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan, that his ceremonial weapon was fully loaded and that he was trained to use it. The quiet one suddenly lunged forward, trying to grab James's rifle. Without hesitation, James stepped back again and brought his weapon to bear, this time with even more authority. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard. Do not approach." But instead of backing down, the three men began to circle him more aggressively. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, but no one seemed willing to intervene. James realized he was in a precarious situation. He couldn't abandon his post, but he also couldn't allow these men to continue their harassment or potentially harm anyone else. The tall man threw something at James's feet. It appeared to be a small bottle that shattered on the cobblestones, sending liquid splashing onto his polished boots. The smell of beer mixed with the evening rain. "Oops," the man laughed. "Sorry about that, soldier boy. Hope that doesn't mess up your pretty uniform." James remained in position, but his mind was racing. The situation was escalating beyond normal tourist harassment. These men were becoming increasingly bold and aggressive. He needed backup, but protocol required him to maintain his post unless directly ordered otherwise, or facing immediate physical danger. As the three men prepared for their next move, James caught sight of something that made his heart rate increase even more. A black sedan with tinted windows had pulled up nearby, and someone was watching the situation unfold from the passenger seat. The harassment continued to escalate as more people gathered to watch the spectacle. James noticed that what had started as three drunk troublemakers had attracted a crowd of nearly 30 onlookers, many with their phones out recording everything. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he knew it would only get worse. The stocky man produced a plastic water bottle and began squirting it at James's boots and uniform. "Dance for us, guard," he shouted, laughing as the water splashed against the red fabric. "Come on, show us what you're really made of." James felt each drop of water hit his carefully maintained uniform, but he remained motionless. Years of training had taught him that reacting to every provocation would only encourage more of the same behavior. However, his patience was wearing thin, especially as the crowd began to cheer and laugh at his expense. The tall man with messy hair stepped even closer, now emboldened by the crowd's reaction. "I heard these guards can't even speak unless someone attacks them directly. Is that true?" He poked James in the chest with his finger. "What about now? Can you talk now?" James's grip tightened on his rifle, but he maintained his composure. The poke had been aggressive, but not quite enough to constitute an assault that would justify further action. He could feel sweat building under his bearskin hat despite the cool evening air. "Maybe he's deaf," suggested the quiet one, who had become increasingly vocal as the alcohol continued to affect his judgment. He clapped his hands loudly right next to James's ear. "Hello? Anyone home in there?" The crowd laughed and someone shouted, "Make him move again," referring to James's earlier warning when they had tried to touch his hat. The encouragement from the spectators was making the three men bolder with each passing minute. The tall man pulled out his phone and began taking selfies with James in the background. "This is going straight to Instagram," he announced. "Look, everyone, I'm hanging out with one of the Queen's toy soldiers." He leaned against James's shoulder, as if they were old friends posing for a casual photo. James could smell the alcohol on the man's breath and feel the weight of him pressing against his uniform. This was definitely crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, but still not quite enough to justify the level of response he was authorized to use. The fine line between maintaining discipline and protecting himself was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. The stocky man seemed to sense James's internal struggle and decided to push things further. He began chanting, "Toy soldier, toy soldier," while marching in an exaggerated military style around James's position. Soon several members of the crowd joined in with the chant, turning the whole scene into a mockery of military service. James thought about his fellow soldiers who had died serving their country, about the pride and honor that came with wearing the uniform of the Queen's Guard. These drunk civilians had no understanding of what it meant to serve, to put duty above personal comfort, to stand ready to defend others even when they showed no appreciation for that sacrifice. The quiet one, perhaps sensing that simple harassment wasn't getting the reaction they wanted, decided to escalate things physically. He walked around behind James and began tugging at the straps of his equipment. "I wonder what's under all this gear," he said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "Let's find out." This was the moment James had been dreading. The man was now attempting to remove his military equipment which posed both a security risk and a direct challenge to his ability to perform his duties. James spun around quickly and used his rifle to create space between himself and the attacker. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard. This is your final warning." The authority in James's voice was unmistakable, and for a moment the entire crowd fell silent. The three men stepped back, but James could see in their eyes that they weren't finished. The alcohol had made them too bold to back down now, especially with so many people watching and recording. "Look at him getting all tough now," the tall man sneered. "What are you going to do, shoot us? For what, having a little fun? I don't think so, mate. You're all bark and no bite." The stocky man picked up a small stone from the ground. "Let's see how tough he really is," he said, tossing the stone so it bounced off James's chest. It wasn't hard enough to cause injury, but it was a clear assault on a member of the Queen's Guard. James knew he was now authorized to take stronger action, but he also knew that anything he did would be recorded and analyzed by millions of people online within hours. One wrong move could end his career and bring shame to the entire regiment. He had to be smart about this. The crowd was getting restless, some calling for the men to stop while others encouraged them to continue. James noticed that several people were trying to call the police on their phones, but he also saw others who seemed to be enjoying the confrontation as entertainment. The quiet one had found a discarded beer can and was now throwing it at James's legs. "Come on, do something," he taunted. "Or are you just going to stand there all night letting us make fools of you?" James realized that his situation was becoming impossible. If he continued to do nothing, these men would escalate their behavior until someone got seriously hurt. If he took action to defend himself, he risked being portrayed as the aggressor by people who didn't understand the context or his training. The tall man seemed to sense James's dilemma and pressed his advantage. He walked right up to James and stood inches from his face. "You know what I think? I think you're scared. I think behind all that fancy uniform and training, you're just another scared little boy playing dress-up." The insult hit James harder than any of the physical provocations had. He had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, had lost friends in combat, had earned his place in one of the most elite military units in the world. But he couldn't defend himself against drunk civilians without potentially destroying his career and reputation. As James struggled with his options, he noticed that the black sedan he had seen earlier was still parked nearby. The passenger door had opened slightly, and someone appeared to be watching the situation very carefully. James wondered if it might be plainclothes police or palace security, but he couldn't be sure. The three men were now coordinating their harassment, taking turns to provoke James while the others filmed and provided commentary for their social media audience. They had turned his duty into their personal entertainment show, and there seemed to be no end in sight. Just as James was beginning to wonder how much longer he could endure this humiliation, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The person in the sedan was stepping out of the vehicle, and even in the dim light, James could see that this was no ordinary observer. The way the figure moved, the confidence in their step, the subtle signs that this person was accustomed to command, all of it suggested someone of significant importance was about to intervene in this increasingly dangerous situation. The figure approaching from the black sedan walked with unmistakable authority, though James couldn't make out the person's face in the dim streetlight. The three drunk men were too focused on their harassment to notice the newcomer, but several members of the crowd had begun to whisper and point. "I bet he won't even fight back if we really push him," the tall man was saying as he reached toward James's rifle again. "These palace guards are all for show. They're probably not even allowed to defend themselves." James remained perfectly still, but his eyes tracked the approaching figure. Something about the person's bearing suggested military training, and there was a confidence in their stride that spoke of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The stocky man had found another bottle and was preparing to throw it when a voice cut through the night air with crystal-clear authority. "That's quite enough." The voice was calm, but carried such natural command that everyone in the crowd, including the three harassers, immediately turned to look. James felt a chill of recognition run down his spine, though he couldn't yet see the speaker's face clearly. "Who the hell are you?" the tall man demanded, his words still slurred but now tinged with uncertainty. The sudden appearance of someone so clearly in control had shaken his alcohol-fueled confidence. The figure stepped into the circle of light cast by the nearest street lamp, and James felt his world shift. Standing before them, dressed in civilian clothes but unmistakably commanding the situation, was Prince William, heir to the throne of England. The crowd's whispers turned to gasps of recognition, and phones were quickly redirected from filming James to capturing this unexpected royal appearance. But the three drunk men, their vision clouded by alcohol and their judgment impaired, didn't immediately recognize who they were facing. "I asked you a question," the tall man said belligerently, stepping toward the prince. "This is none of your business, mate. We're just having a bit of fun with your toy soldier here." Prince William's expression remained calm, but there was steel in his voice when he replied, "This gentleman is not a toy soldier. He's a highly trained member of Her Majesty's Guard, and he deserves your respect, not your harassment." The stocky man laughed loudly. "Oh, we've got another one who thinks these guards are special. What are you, some kind of military buff? Maybe you should mind your own business before you get yourself in trouble." James watched in amazement as Prince William stepped closer to the men, showing no fear despite being outnumbered and facing potentially violent individuals. The prince's military training from his time in the RAF was evident in his posture and movement. "I'll tell you what," Prince William said, his voice remaining eerily calm. "Why don't you gentlemen explain to me exactly what you think you're accomplishing here? What's the point of harassing someone who's doing his job?" The quiet one, who had been the most aggressive in his physical harassment, stepped forward with renewed boldness. "The point is that we're showing everyone what a joke this whole thing is. These guards just stand around all day pretending to be important while real people work real jobs and pay taxes to support this whole ridiculous system." "I see." Prince William nodded thoughtfully. "So you believe that military service is not real work? That protecting others is not important?" The tall man waved dismissively. "Look at him," he said, gesturing toward James. "Standing there like a statue, not even allowed to defend himself. What kind of soldier can't even fight back when someone throws things at him? It's pathetic." Prince William's expression hardened slightly. "You think he can't defend himself? You think his restraint makes him weak?" "Exactly," the stocky man interjected. "We could do whatever we wanted to him and he'd just stand there and take it like a good little servant." "Is that so?" Prince William asked, his voice taking on a dangerous edge that James recognized from military commanders he had served under. "And what if I told you that this servant, as you call him, is likely more highly trained in combat than all three of you combined?" The crowd had grown larger and quieter, sensing that something significant was happening but not sure what. Many people were clearly recognizing Prince William now, but the three drunk men remained oblivious. "Oh, please," the quiet one scoffed. "These ceremonial guards are just for tourists and parades. They're not real soldiers." Prince William stepped directly in front of the man who had just spoken. "This guardsman has likely completed advanced military training, weapons qualification, combat readiness exercises, and possibly served in active combat zones. His restraint in the face of your harassment demonstrates discipline and professionalism that you clearly don't understand. Who made you the expert?" the tall man demanded, his voice rising. "And who gave you the right to lecture us about anything?" Prince William smiled then, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them. "Well, since you asked, I suppose I should introduce myself properly." James watched as recognition slowly dawned on the faces of some crowd members, but the three harassers were still too intoxicated to understand what was happening. "My name is William," the prince said simply, "and I have some experience with military matters myself. I served as a search and rescue pilot with the Royal Air Force, and I have great respect for all members of our armed forces." The stocky man laughed again, but it sounded forced now. "William, is it? Well, William, maybe you should stick to flying helicopters and leave the street education to people who understand how the real world works." "The real world," Prince William repeated slowly. "Yes, let's talk about the real world. In the real world, this guardsman you've been harassing has sworn an oath to protect others, possibly including ungrateful civilians like yourselves. In the real world, his training and discipline make him far more dangerous than you could imagine. Yet he's shown remarkable restraint in not responding to your provocations." The tall man was becoming more agitated. "I don't care what kind of training he has. He's being paid by our tax money to stand around and look pretty. If he wants respect, he should earn it." Prince William's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried clearly in the now silent street. "Earn it? This man has earned more respect in one day of service than you've shown in your entire performance here tonight." The crowd was completely silent now, phones recording every word. James remained at attention, but his mind was reeling. The future King of England was defending him personally against these harassers, and he wasn't even supposed to be here. The quiet one, perhaps sensing that the dynamic had shifted but not understanding why, decided to escalate one more time. "You know what, William? Why don't you mind your own business? We're not hurting anyone. We're just showing people what a joke this whole royal protection thing is." That's when Prince William decided it was time to reveal exactly who they were dealing with, and James knew that everything was about to change dramatically. Prince William reached into his jacket and slowly pulled out his identification. The movement was deliberate and calm, but something about it made the entire crowd hold their breath. Even the three drunk men seemed to sense that a significant moment was approaching. "Since you're so interested in who I am," Prince William said, holding up his ID so the nearest streetlight illuminated it clearly. "Perhaps this will help clarify things for you." The tall man squinted at the identification, his alcohol-impaired vision making it difficult to focus. But as the reality of what he was seeing began to penetrate his intoxicated mind, his expression changed from belligerent confidence to dawning horror. That's not," he stammered, looking back and forth between the ID and Prince William's face. "Prince William Arthur Philip Lewis," the prince said calmly, "heir to the throne of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And you three gentlemen have just spent the last hour harassing one of my grandmother's guards in front of me." The stocky man's face went white, and the beer bottle he had been holding slipped from his fingers to shatter on the cobblestones. The quiet one actually took several steps backward, as if distance might somehow undo everything that had just happened. The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Phones that had been recording the harassment were now frantically trying to capture every second of this unprecedented encounter. James remained at attention, but he could hardly believe what he was witnessing. "Your Royal Highness," the tall man began, his voice now shaking and all traces of his earlier arrogance gone. We didn't know. I mean, you weren't what?" Prince William asked, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "You weren't harassing a member of the Queen's Guard? You weren't throwing things at him? You weren't attempting to remove his equipment and making a mockery of his service?" The three men stood frozen, the full weight of their situation finally hitting them. They had spent an hour publicly humiliating a royal guard, while the future King of England watched, and it had all been recorded by dozens of witnesses. The stocky man tried to speak, but Prince William held up a hand for silence. "You were just demonstrating a complete lack of respect for the men and women who serve this country," the prince said firmly. "You were just showing everyone here what ignorance and entitlement look like when they've had too much to drink." James watched as Prince William stepped closer to him, and for the first time in over an hour, someone addressed him directly with respect. "Sergeant," Prince William said, having read James's rank insignia, "I apologize that you had to endure this harassment. Your conduct has been exemplary, and your restraint in the face of such provocation demonstrates the highest standards of military discipline." "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," James replied, his voice steady despite the emotional impact of finally being acknowledged as a human being rather than a tourist attraction. Prince William turned back to the three men, who were now looking desperately uncomfortable and completely sober despite the alcohol still in their systems. "Now then," the prince said, "I believe you gentlemen owe Sergeant Mitchell an apology." "A sincere one." The tall man stepped forward, his hands shaking visibly. "Sergeant Mitchell, I'm deeply sorry for what we did. We were drunk and stupid, and we had no right to treat you that way. You were just doing your job, and we were completely out of line." The stocky man and the quiet one quickly followed with their own stammered apologies, each more desperate than the last to somehow undo the catastrophic mistake they had made. James accepted their apologies with military professionalism, but Prince William wasn't finished. "Apologies are a start," the prince said, "but actions have consequences. Sergeant Mitchell has maintained his post and performed his duties despite significant provocation. You three have publicly disrespected not only him personally, but the uniform he wears and everything it represents." The crowd was completely silent now, everyone straining to hear what would happen next. The three men looked like they wished the ground would open up and swallow them. "Your Royal Highness," the tall man pleaded, "please, we understand we made a terrible mistake. We'll do anything to make it right. We never meant any disrespect to you or the monarchy." Prince William's expression was unreadable. You didn't know I was here when you were harassing Sergeant Mitchell. Your behavior wasn't about disrespecting me personally. It was about your fundamental lack of respect for service, sacrifice, and duty. The prince walked over to James and stood beside him, a gesture that was clearly visible to everyone present and being recorded by dozens of phones. This man, Prince William said, addressing the crowd as much as the three harassers, represents something that apparently needs to be explained. He doesn't stand here for your entertainment or as a tourist attraction. He stands here as a guardian, ready to put his life on the line to protect others, including people who clearly don't deserve his protection. The weight of those words settled over everyone present. The three men who had been so bold and aggressive an hour ago now looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. Sergeant Mitchell has served his country in combat, Prince William continued, and tonight he has shown the kind of discipline and restraint that makes the British military respected around the world. While you three were throwing bottles and trying to humiliate him, he was demonstrating the highest standards of professional conduct. The quiet one, who had been the most physically aggressive, finally found his voice. Your Royal Highness, how can we make this right? We know we've made a terrible mistake. Prince William considered this for a moment, then looked at James. Sergeant, what do you think would be appropriate? James was stunned to be asked for his opinion, especially by the prince. After a moment's thought, he spoke carefully. Your Royal Highness, these gentlemen were intoxicated and clearly didn't understand the seriousness of their actions. Perhaps they might benefit from learning more about what military service actually involves, rather than simply being punished. Prince William nodded approvingly. Wise words, Sergeant. Very wise indeed. The prince turned back to the three men with an expression that suggested he had made a decision that would change all their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Prince William studied the three men for a long moment before speaking again. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited to hear what consequences would follow from their public harassment of a royal guard in front of the future king. Sergeant Mitchell has suggested education rather than punishment, Prince William finally said. I find myself impressed by his wisdom and generosity, considering what you've put him through tonight. The tall man nodded eagerly, clearly grasping at any alternative to more serious consequences. Yes, Your Royal Highness, we would be honored to learn more about military service. We realize now how ignorant we were. Good, Prince William replied. Then here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, all three of you will report to Wellington Barracks at 600 hours. You'll spend the day with the Grenadier Guards, learning exactly what it takes to earn the right to wear that uniform. The stocky man's face paled further. Tomorrow morning? But it's Saturday night and we've been drinking. Prince William's expression didn't change. Yes, you have been drinking, which means you'll discover what it's like to maintain military standards while feeling less than your best. I think that will be quite educational. The crowd murmured appreciatively at this poetic justice. Several people could be heard chuckling at the thought of these arrogant young men having to face military discipline with hangovers. Furthermore, the prince continued, you'll each complete a week of community service with veteran organizations. You'll hear firsthand from soldiers who have sacrificed far more than standing still for a few hours while tourists take pictures. James watched as the three men exchanged glances, clearly realizing that their night of fun was going to cost them much more than they had anticipated. Your Royal Highness, the quiet one said hesitantly. What about, will people know about this? Prince William looked around at the crowd of people still recording everything on their phones. I think it's safe to say that your behavior tonight has already become quite public. The question is whether the story ends with you as three drunk bullies who harassed a soldier, or evolves into something more redemptive. The prince pulled out his own phone and made a brief call. James could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was clear that arrangements were being made. Colonel Patterson, it's William. I'm going to need you to arrange something special for tomorrow morning. Yes, I know it's short notice. 3 young men who need to learn what service means. Excellent, thank you. After ending the call, Prince William turned back to the 3 men. Colonel Patterson will be expecting you at 600 sharp. I suggest you use the rest of tonight to sober up and prepare for what might be the most educational day of your lives. The tall man nodded frantically. Yes, Your Royal Highness. We'll be there. Thank you for giving us this chance to make things right. But Prince William wasn't finished. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered. many of whom were still recording. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prince said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air, "you've witnessed something important tonight. Not just the harassment of a soldier doing his duty, but also the difference between those who serve others and those who serve only themselves." The crowd listened intently, aware that they were hearing something significant. Sergeant Mitchell has stood his post for hours tonight, maintaining his discipline and professionalism, despite provocation that would have tested anyone's patience. He represents thousands of men and women who put duty before comfort, service before self-interest. James felt a surge of pride and emotion at hearing his service acknowledged so publicly and respectfully by the future king. The gentlemen who harassed him represent something else, Prince William continued. They represent the disconnect that sometimes exists between those who sacrifice and those who benefit from that sacrifice without understanding its cost. The three men stood with their heads down, the full weight of their actions finally sinking in. "But tonight also represents an opportunity," the prince said, "an opportunity for understanding, for growth, for redemption. These three men will have the chance to learn what service really means, to understand the dedication and sacrifice that their previous ignorance led them to mock." Prince William then did something that surprised everyone, including James. He stepped forward and shook the sergeant's hand. "Sergeant Mitchell, thank you for your service, your professionalism, and your wisdom in suggesting education over punishment. You've handled this situation with exactly the kind of dignity and grace that makes the British military respected around the world." James felt overwhelmed by the gesture. In all his years of service, he had never imagined that he would receive such recognition from a member of the royal family, especially under these circumstances. The crowd began to applaud, and James noticed that many people were wiping away tears. The transformation of the evening from harassment to honor, from mockery to respect, had moved everyone present. Prince William turned to leave, but then paused and addressed the three men one final time. "Gentlemen, you have an opportunity now that few people get. You can learn from your mistakes, grow from this experience, and perhaps even become advocates for the very people you mocked tonight. I hope you'll make the most of it." The tall man stepped forward. "Your Royal Highness, I promise you we will. This has changed everything for us." "I hope so," Prince William replied, "because Sergeant Mitchell deserved better from you tonight, and our veterans deserve better from all of us every day." As the prince walked back toward his car, the crowd began to disperse. But many people approached James to thank him for his service and to express their disgust at how he had been treated. The three men stood apart, clearly processing what had just happened and what tomorrow would bring. James remained at his post, but everything had changed. What had started as one of the worst nights of his military career had become something else entirely. A moment when his service had been recognized, respected, and honored at the highest levels. But the real test for everyone involved would come the next morning at Wellington Barracks, where three humbled young men would discover what it truly meant to serve. At precisely 600 hours the next morning, three very different young men stood outside the gates of Wellington Barracks. The confident, aggressive troublemakers from the night before had been replaced by nervous, hungover individuals who were beginning to understand the gravity of what they had gotten themselves into. The tall man, whose name was Marcus, had barely slept. He had spent most of the night researching the Grenadier Guards online, learning about their history, their service, and their standards. What he discovered had filled him with a growing sense of dread and shame about his behavior. The stocky man, called David, had arrived early and spent 20 minutes pacing outside the barracks, trying to work up the courage to go through with what Prince William had ordered. His hangover was severe, but his anxiety was even worse. The quiet one, named Thomas, had actually been sick twice during the night. Not from alcohol, but from the stress of realizing he had physically assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard while the future king watched. He kept replaying the evening in his mind, horrified at his own actions. Colonel Patterson appeared at exactly 0600, looking every inch the career military officer. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing rigid, and his expression suggested that he had little patience for the three civilians who had been thrust upon his schedule. "You three are the gentlemen who harassed one of my guards last night," the colonel said without preamble. His Royal Highness has asked me to educate you about what military service actually involves. I intend to do exactly that. Marcus stepped forward, trying to show leadership despite his pounding headache. Yes, sir. We're here to learn and to make amends for our behavior. You'll address me as Colonel, not Sir, Patterson corrected sharply, and you'll learn that making amends means more than just showing up. It means understanding what you mocked, respecting what you dismissed, and perhaps discovering something about yourselves in the process. The three men were led into the barracks, where they were immediately surrounded by the sights and sounds of military life. Soldiers in various stages of preparation moved with purpose and precision. Equipment was maintained to spotless standards. Every movement seemed deliberate and disciplined. This is where Sergeant Mitchell and guards like him prepare for duty, Colonel Patterson explained. While you were sleeping off your drinking, these men and women were maintaining their equipment, studying protocols, and preparing to stand post regardless of weather, harassment, or personal discomfort. Thomas raised his hand tentatively. Colonel, how long do they typically stand guard without moving? 2 hours at a time in normal conditions, the colonel replied. Longer in special circumstances, and they do so while maintaining complete alertness, ready to respond to any threat or emergency. It requires physical conditioning, mental discipline, and a level of dedication that I suspect is foreign to all of you. David looked around at the soldiers preparing for their duties. They all seem so focused, serious. They're professionals, Colonel Patterson said firmly. They take their responsibilities seriously because other people's safety depends on their performance. When you were throwing bottles at Sergeant Mitchell last night, you were potentially interfering with his ability to detect and respond to real threats. The colonel led them to a training area where new recruits were learning basic drill movements. The three men watched as young soldiers practiced marching, turning, and weapon handling with meticulous attention to detail. This is week 12 of their training, Colonel Patterson explained. They've been learning not just how to move and stand properly, but how to think like soldiers, how to put the mission above personal comfort, duty above personal preference. Marcus watched the recruits and felt a growing sense of shame. Colonel, we called them toy soldiers. We thought they were just for show. Many people think that, the colonel acknowledged. They see the ceremony and assume it's all pageantry. They don't understand that these same soldiers who stand guard at the palace have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other combat zones. They don't realize that the discipline required to stand perfectly still for hours is the same discipline that keeps soldiers alive in combat. The three men spent the next hour observing various aspects of military training and preparation. They watched soldiers maintaining their equipment, practicing marksmanship, and studying tactical procedures. Each activity drove home the same point. Military service required dedication, skill, and sacrifice that none of them had understood. During a break, Thomas approached one of the younger soldiers. How long have you been in the Guards? He asked. 2 years, the soldier replied. I joined straight from school. Did my training, then was deployed to Afghanistan for 6 months before being assigned to ceremonial duties. Afghanistan? David asked, startled. You were actually in combat? Yes, the soldier said simply. Most of us have been. The ceremonial duties are just one part of what we do. We're soldiers first, guards second. The conversation continued, and the three civilians learned about the soldier's experiences in combat, his friends who had been wounded or killed, and the pride he felt in serving his country despite the dangers and hardships. Colonel Patterson rejoined them and led them to meet Sergeant Mitchell, who had just finished his shift and was still in full ceremonial dress. Sergeant, the colonel said, these are the gentlemen from last night. They've spent the morning learning about what you and your fellow guards actually do. James looked at the three men, noting their changed demeanor. Gone was the arrogance and mockery. In its place was something that looked like genuine remorse and newfound respect. Sergeant Mitchell, Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly. I want to apologize again, but more than that, I want to thank you for what you do. We had no idea what we were really mocking last night. We thought you were just standing there doing nothing. David added, we didn't understand that you were actually protecting people, that you had real training and experience. Thomas was the last to speak, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm ashamed of how I treated you, especially the physical harassment. You could have hurt me easily, but you showed restraint and professionalism that I clearly don't possess. James listened to their apologies, then responded with the same dignity he had shown the night before. "Gentlemen, I accept your apologies and I appreciate that you've taken the time to learn about military service. The important thing now is what you do with this understanding going forward." Colonel Patterson nodded approvingly. "Well said, Sergeant. Now, gentlemen, your education is far from over. You still have 6 days of community service with veteran organizations ahead of you. I suggest you approach those experiences with the same openness to learning that you've shown today." As the 3 men prepared to leave, each of them shook hands with Sergeant Mitchell and Colonel Patterson, their attitudes completely transformed from the night before. What had begun as a punishment had become a genuine learning experience that would likely change their perspectives permanently. 3 months later, James Mitchell was completing another evening shift when he noticed a familiar figure approaching his post. It was Marcus, the tall man who had been the ringleader of the harassment that memorable night. But this time, he was wearing a volunteer coordinator vest and leading a group of school children on an educational tour. "And this," Marcus was saying to the children, "is one of the Queen's Guards. His name is Sergeant Mitchell, and he's a real soldier who has served our country in combat zones overseas." James remained at attention, but he couldn't help but feel surprised at the transformation in Marcus's tone and attitude. The young man who had once mocked his service was now educating others about its importance. "Can he really not move?" asked one of the children, a girl of about 8 years old. "He can move when he needs to," Marcus explained patiently. "But part of his duty is to remain perfectly still and alert while he's on guard. It takes incredible discipline and training to be able to do that. These guards are some of the most professional soldiers in the world." After the tour group moved on, Marcus lingered for a moment. When no other tourists were nearby, he approached James more closely. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you again for how you handled that situation 3 months ago. Your response changed my life completely." James made a subtle nod, the only acknowledgement he could give while on duty. "I've been volunteering with the Help for Heroes charity," Marcus continued. "Working with veterans, learning their stories, trying to give back after what I did. Your suggestion that night about education over punishment, it was exactly what I needed." Later that week, James received an unexpected invitation to attend a ceremony at the Royal British Legion. When he arrived in his dress uniform, he was surprised to see David and Thomas already there, also dressed formally and apparently involved in the event. The ceremony was to recognize outstanding community service by individuals who had made significant contributions to veteran welfare. James was even more surprised when he learned that all 3 of the men who had harassed him were being honored for their work over the past 3 months. David had organized a fundraising campaign that had raised over £50,000 for disabled veterans. Thomas had started a program to help former soldiers find employment after their military service ended. And Marcus had developed an educational program that had already reached over 1,000 school children, teaching them about military service and sacrifice. During the ceremony, Prince William appeared as the guest of honor to present the awards. When he saw James in the audience, he made a point to approach him during the reception. "Sergeant Mitchell," the prince said warmly, "I wanted you to know how proud I am of the way you handled that situation 3 months ago. Your wisdom in suggesting education over punishment has led to remarkable results." "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," James replied. "I'm amazed at what those 3 gentlemen have accomplished." "As am I," Prince William agreed. "But I'm not surprised. You saw something in them that night that they couldn't see in themselves. Your compassion and judgment turned what could have been just another ugly incident into something genuinely positive." Later, during the formal presentations, Prince William addressed the audience. "Tonight we honor 3 young men who have transformed a moment of shame into months of service," he said. "But their story begins with a soldier who chose understanding over anger, education over retaliation." Sergeant James Mitchell demonstrated the highest ideals of military service not through force, but through wisdom and restraint. The prince gestured for James to stand and the entire audience rose in applause. James felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but more importantly, by seeing how his response to that difficult night had created such positive outcomes. After the ceremony, the 3 men approached James together. "Sergeant," Marcus began, "we wanted you to know that we've all decided to continue our work with veterans long term. This isn't just about making up for one bad night anymore. We've discovered something we're passionate about. David nodded enthusiastically. Working with disabled veterans has opened my eyes to sacrifices I never imagined. These people gave everything for their country, and many of them struggle just to get basic support. Thomas, who had been the quietest during their original harassment, was now the most emotional. I've met soldiers who lost limbs, who suffer from PTSD, who came back to a country that often doesn't understand what they've been through. I can't believe how ignorant and cruel we were that night. But that's exactly why your work now is so important, James replied. You understand both sides now, the ignorance and the reality. That makes you uniquely qualified to bridge that gap for others. As the evening concluded, James reflected on the unexpected turn his life had taken. What had begun as one of the most challenging and humiliating experiences of his military career had evolved into something profound and meaningful. 6 months later, James received news that he was being promoted and transferred to a new position training young guards. On his last day at his ceremonial post, he was surprised by a visit from Colonel Patterson and Prince William. Sergeant Mitchell, the prince said, your conduct that night has become something of a legend within the military. You've shown that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from fighting, but from finding the humanity in your opponents, Colonel Patterson added. The way you handled that situation has been incorporated into our training programs. We now teach young guards that their greatest weapon is often their wisdom and restraint. As James prepared to leave his post for the final time, he noticed a new plaque that had been installed nearby. It read, in recognition of all guards who serve with honor, dignity, and wisdom, protecting not just places, but the values that make those places worth protecting. The 3 men who had once harassed him were now among the most effective advocates for military personnel and veterans in London. Their transformation from ignorant harassers to passionate advocates had inspired others and created a ripple effect of positive change. James realized that his decision that night to recommend education over punishment had not only changed 3 lives, but had created a lasting legacy of understanding and respect. Sometimes the most powerful response to hatred and ignorance is not force, but the patient belief that people can change when given the opportunity to see the truth. As he walked away from his post for the last time, James smiled, knowing that his greatest contribution to his country might not have been his combat service or his ceremonial duties, but a single moment of compassion that had transformed enemies into allies and mockery into respect. The true victory had been won not through strength, but through the courage to choose hope over anger, understanding over retaliation,